welcome to another episode of Insider's Guide to the Law. I am your host, attorney Melissa Levine-Pirro, and I own Levine-Pirro Law located in Maynard, Massachusetts. Each month we bring to you legal experts from various fields to provide you with some general information about some hot topic legal issues. With me today is attorney Julie Franklin, who's going to be discussing student loans. So welcome back to the show, Julie.
Hi, thank you for having me again.
No problem. All right, so student loans have been in the news everywhere lately.
And that's a good way of describing a big problem.
So what is our problem as a nation with student loans?
Well, it happened, I believe, and this is my own humble opinion, that with the real estate crisis of 2008, we saw a lot of banks lend to students at some pretty high interest rates, and those students, if they didn't qualify for government loans through FAFSA, were required to have their parents co-sign on these loans. And those students that have, graduated, not graduated, and gone on in an economy that was not the economy that they started school in, or has faltered with respect to the employment opportunities that they had hoped to achieve or reach. Those individuals are underemployed. And when we say underemployed, we mean specifically that they are working as a genius at the Apple Store, but they have a mechanical engineering degree, or they are, a graduate history aficionado, and they have had to find work at the elementary school teaching. And while these jobs are incredibly valuable to our economy, we all need Apple geniuses and elementary school teachers, those jobs do not pay like the graduate student might have hoped that the job that they would get out of school would pay. And for that reason, a number of people default on these loans. And when we say default, we mean a loan comes to you in the form of that servicer or the lender, and those entities demand payment, and you don't have it. Mm-hmm. So you just don't pay it. And that's a default, and that's not a good thing. So with respect to student loans, where there are government student loans or private student loans that have been co-signed by parents, those individuals that do default, well, their parents are getting the lawsuits because they signed the loan also. And when you default on a loan that you have signed and also had a co-signer on that loan, if you don't pay, the co-signer present means that the lender can come after the individual that has signed on to the loan as the co-signer. And so for a lot of cases, we are seeing parents that have property, that are retired, that have income but not substantial income, receive lawsuits, naming them as the defendant, requesting payment on these student loans that have been defaulted on by the student.
And do federal loans have co-signers too?
So it varies based upon the lender's requirements for giving the loan. So if you came to me and you said, hey, Julie, I want a $10,000 student loan, and you didn't have anything substantial that I believed that I could secure that loan to, or in the case of student loans, they really can't be secured. So the security for that lender is the co-signer. Because the co-signer may have more assets, they may be more financially sound. So that is discretionary based upon, the lending of that money. There may be certain requirements that you have to adhere to in order to get those funds, in order to start school. But those are weighty requirements. Those are weighty responsibilities. And whenever you are approached and asked to be a co-signer, you need to consult an attorney. I would highly recommend speaking with somebody about the metes and bounds of that obligation, because a number of these parents did not realize that this might happen and are very surprised when it does, and are in a position where they have to pull equity out of a home or take a penalty on a retirement amount in order to attempt to either pay these off in full, settle them at a reduced balance, or pay them over time in monthly installments. But that also is up to the lender and whether or not they're willing to give you the option to do those things, especially after a default.
Right. And I think part of the reason for such high student loan balances is just the cost of educational institutions.
I agree wholeheartedly. And, Elizabeth Warren in Washington is doing some good work, but as far as an actual functional framework for dealing with these student loans, we don't have one yet. And, we had filmed another episode and spoken briefly about the effect of bankruptcy and student loans. There's no relief in bankruptcy. There are no options in a bankruptcy. If you owe $40,000 on a private student loan, and let's back up a second with respect to the specificity of a student loan itself. So a student loan is either given to you by virtue of a government program, or it's given to you privately. And a private loan is basically the same thing as a personal line of credit, except for in a personal line of credit, you may not have to pay it back in bankruptcy. If this money that you receive from a private lender is designated to pay for educational purposes, that is a student loan obligation, and it can't be discharged in bankruptcy. It's got to be paid. Mm-hmm. So the private lender would move forward in a state court of competent jurisdiction, and they're even going so as far to garnish wages and garnish them significantly in order to be satisfied. And again, cycling back to doing nothing is basically the worst thing you can do. The longer you do nothing and you think they're going to go away, not only do they not go away, but the interest amounts accrue substantially. So by not doing anything and then in 5 years getting a notice, your bill is going to be potentially 3 times what it was if you had just approached the problem head on. So this sort of wait and see approach in the context of private student loans is absolutely not something you can do. You need to be if you don't know the designation of your student loans with respect to whether it's government or private, you should be looking it up as you're watching the show. You should have knowledge as to what you have signed so that you can deal with the repercussions of at least attempting to pay it before you default. Because, a lender, though many times they are a corporation, okay, they have requirements for what they are willing to offer you based upon, their contact with you over the time that they have had that loan. And if you disappear off the face of the planet for about 10 years and then you come back and say, hey, I want a deal, they're going to be less inclined to do that for you because you fell off the face of the planet. That's not their problem.
Right.
You could have communicated that you had unemployment issues or underemployment issues. You could have communicated that you had a death in the family that, gave rise to a big financial concern. So being, on the affirmative, on the offense rather than the defense for student loans is the name of the game, and that will definitely avoid bigger problems that will easily compound if you don't do anything about them. So knowing what your loans are, that's the first step, whether they're government or private. If they're private, you need to make an agreement with the private lender, because that private lender, if you don't make that agreement or if you do default, they can absolutely move against you in a court. They can obtain a judgment. They can enforce that judgment through a wage garnishment or through a lien. And if you have a cosigner, that cosigner is as much on the hook as you are for that loan in its entirety. So by having a cosigner on a private student loan and defaulting, you're not doing that cosigner any favors in the long run. And most importantly, you're not doing yourself any favors. So that's really, you've got to get on the ball with respect to identifying whether or not your student loans are government or private, and then, even further working out some type of agreement with that private lender to get on top of payments that will blow up and be a very big problem for you in the future if you do nothing about them.
So if we have viewers at home that can't pay either as the borrower or as the cosigner, is the best thing for them to do literally just pick up the phone and call the lender and say, listen, I can't pay. Can we set up some kind of payment plan?
So absolutely. Now, the Department of Education, they have a program that is a 3-year look-back program on, it's similar to the non-collectible status of the Internal Revenue Service, where you communicate to that lender. You say, look, I can't afford to pay anything. These are my numbers.
Yep.
And so the Department of Education will look at your assets over that 3-year period and do a re-review every year to make sure you haven't won the lottery or you didn't inherit something massive that could now give you the ability to pay those student loans. But again, we're talking government, and private is not something that you can really, unfortunately at this time, do much about, but pay or work out. And you know, in a lot of cases, if you do nothing, they will sue you. And so sometimes you can settle with those creditors in that lawsuit and say, look, I will pay you a lump sum, but I just don't have it, and I'm never going to have it. So in those cases, you can really, you know, reduce the entire liability up to 50%, and in some cases even more if there is a legitimate reason for why you haven't been able to pay these student loans. But that is the crux right now of the private student loan condition, is that, you know, you're limited in what you're able to do. Now, with respect to bankruptcy and student loans, there is a hardship framework in bankruptcy which allows you to petition to the court that based upon a hardship that you have undergone, the student loans that you incurred are never going to be able to be paid back. And because they are never going to be able to be paid back based on your specific circumstance and situation, you can make a good faith showing to a bankruptcy court judge that you are entitled to a hardship discharge of those student loans. But in those cases, of which there are not many, because if you think about it, so a bankruptcy case, you know, a debtor already has to pay an attorney to file bankruptcy when they don't have any money. And the reason why they have to do that is because the bankruptcy attorney can't be a creditor of theirs at the time of filing. But to ask individuals that are in that situation to pay even more money to litigate a bankruptcy claim with respect to this hardship discharge in that bankruptcy has proven to be the most difficult part about student loans and hardship discharges generally.
Well, I assume that the bar is extremely high for that, because you have to prove that you can never pay back your student loans.
Well, so the bar is high, but I mean, you have to think about it in the normal scope of events. If you have gotten into an accident where you are completely paralyzed, and you may have been, you know, a very great architect, but you don't have the ability physically to be that architect anymore, okay? That would be a scenario where you could petition for that hardship discharge. If you are over a certain age and you have cosigner liability on private student loans and you're retired and you're never gonna make this money, that would be a situation where you would go for that hardship discharge. But to be honest, the statistics on the bankruptcy filings with respect to people that even petition for that hardship discharge, it's a very small number. People can't afford to litigate in bankruptcy after they're already there to tell people that they can't afford to pay. So that's, you know, that's the most difficult part, and that's we're hoping that Elizabeth Warren and all those people in Congress in Washington can figure something out with respect to that, because it is such a difficult scenario. But with those government loans, you have a little bit more leeway.
So, I mean, one thing with government loans that I think is astonishing people don't know about is income-based repayment.
Exactly.
So can you explain a little bit about the income-based repayment program and what that means?
So an income-based repayment plan, basically you contact the Department of Education or the servicer of your government loan. And again, I must reiterate, government is extremely important here. You do not qualify for an income-based repayment. for a private loan. They don't have those options available
Right.
to you. But in the context of those government-backed loans, you can call your lender or servicer and say, you know what, I'm not making any money. I know that I owe you $200,000, but I only make 30. And there's no way that I can afford to pay that interest-only payment to you that is $1,000 a month, let's say, because I owe you 200. So in that scenario, you would provide them with your last year filed tax return to prove your income, and then they would settle on a number that they believed, based upon IRS standards and other standards of the Department of Education, that you should be able to pay toward that figure. And once you start the clock on that income-based repayment plan, you are able to enter into a long-term plan of getting those debts forgiven over time. So let's say that you are a public employee, you're a government employee, you do good work for the world, but no one cares because you don't make enough money to where that matters. And the budget just can't, expand to accommodate what you believe that you actually should be making with the degree that you have. In those scenarios, they sometimes offer 10-year programs. And then the overarching element of the income-based repayment plan is that after 25 years of being in that plan, of consistently updating your tax returns, of continuing to pay the agreed-upon figure that they have settled on you being able to pay by virtue of the income information that you've provided them, you get your loans forgiven. So if you have, a $300,000 liability and over the course of 25 years, you just haven't made that much money, but you're doing everything you can to be employed, and you've made those payments timely, and you've been in that program for that 25-year period, whatever remains does get forgiven. And that's the true strong benefit of the income-based repayment plan. On the other hand, and this is both a good and, thing to consider, so to speak, not necessarily a bad thing. As you work, let's say you're not in a fixed income scenario, your income-based repayment, because it's income-based, it goes up.
And it gets reviewed every year, which
Exactly.
is something to take into consideration. I think we should also note, though, that the law has changed over the last couple of years, and that the income base is capped at 15% of your income.
Exactly.
So you're never going to pay 15% of your income, but 15% of $30,000 a year is a lot different than when you're taking 15% of $200,000 a year. So your income-based repayment can get substantial if your income gets substantial.
That's true. That is very true. And just with respect to, and we're going to briefly touch upon this, but so when people come to my office to talk to me about student loans, a number of times they'll say, well, I think it's in deferment or forbearance or something. I don't know. I haven't checked in years. I don't know who has my accounts. I don't know what's going on. And if you find yourself to be one of those people, I would strongly recommend that you pull yourself a credit report. You can go to www.annualcreditreport.com, which is a free site which allows you to pull your credit report from all 3 credit reporting bureaus every year. And if you do it, regularly, this won't give you a score per se. But I will also say that the emphasis on your credit score is perhaps misguided in the media. We've got Credit Karma and Mint and Follow Your Credit, and if you buy this credit card or if you use this credit card, we'll give you a free credit score. Your credit score is based upon your activities over an extended period of time. So month-to-month changes with your credit score are not really going to be anything that you need to worry about or waste time thinking about. Because what you need to do is establish good habits so that in those periods of time, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, 15, 20, you have developed good habits that give rise to that good credit score.
Right.
But any lender is going to look at your payments that you've made on this account, how long you've had the account, whether you've ever been past due or in collection status. And, as far as pulling that credit report, it's a really valuable tool. It's a litmus test for what everybody else has against you, okay? And what's also very important is with that credit report, so if you go to annualcreditreport.com, you fill out your information, and I would just choose one credit reporting bureau so that you save yourself the opportunity to get another credit report in a couple of months just to check back in. You need to think of it as like an oil change. Every 3,000 to 5,000 miles, every 3 to 5 months, you need to be looking at a credit score. You need to be saying, okay, well, and not even so much the credit score, but your credit habits and your credit history.
Right.
So when you don't know what the status of your student loans are, when you don't have an idea of who your lender is with those student loans, pull a credit report. Because you're going to be able to see where those student loans are. There will be a phone number for the lender that's included on that credit report. And that's the first phone call you need to make. Where are these? Where are we at? How long have I been in this position? What can I do to start paying you guys even though I'm not making any money? I want to be proactive about this loan, and I want you to know that I know about you and that you are on my mind. I just also want you to understand that there's only so much I can do. And just by making that first phone call, you're going to be so much better off because it's a watercolor, and you're filling in the picture.
Right.
You need to fill in the picture before you know what decision to make that's right for you.
Right.
And if you can't even figure out, or if you don't know off the top of your head where those loans are, what their interest rates are, who they're with, then those are questions that need to be asked and answered first and foremost before you can even really move into the foray of how to deal with those loans.
And so what's the difference between deferment and forbearance?
So a forbearance is an amount of time that a lender gives you to not pay the loan.
Without penalty.
Without penalty, but when they say without penalty, they mean we're not going to mess up your credit. We're not going to put you in collection. Deferment doesn't actually mean that you are going to be in a position where that's going to positively or negatively affect that account. That being said, there are specific timeframes that a lender will give you. Okay, we'll give you X amount of months to forbear this loan, but that doesn't mean that you don't have to pay it. It just means that we won't come after you for the amount of time that we've told you that this will be in forbearance.
Right.
Once that time frame has ended, you're on the hook. And so it's a short-term solution to a bigger problem. So before you decide to go into deferment, I would recommend asking questions of that lender as to what is going to happen. Can I do this again? Will you give me the ability to do this again? Do I only get one shot at it? And if I only get one shot at it, should I really not go into deferment? How is deferment going to help me? If this is a short-term problem and you believe that you're going to get back on the saddle and that everything's going to be great, then maybe deferment is right for you. But I wouldn't do anything when it comes to your student loans without doing some homework first.
And when should someone come see an attorney about student loans? When do you step in?
Well, so most of the time, if you follow sort of the path that we've just outlined by being proactive, by, as soon as you graduate from school, calling your student loans, saying, look, can we consolidate all of these loans? Can I get into an income-based repayment plan? Can I pay you monthly installments? If you don't do those things, all right, and you find yourself in a position where 5 or 7 years down the road, you're getting lawsuits, or your dad or your mom that co-signed on those loans, they're receiving lawsuit notifications regarding that obligation, that's when I come in. And what I do is attempt to find out what the situation was that gave rise to you not paying. Just because I didn't feel like it is never a good idea, all right? And if you make a lot of money and you just don't feel like opening your mail, that is the worst thing that you could personally do to your credit and also your financial future. These student loans, we graduated a number of years ago and also have student loans. And, we've personally discussed the credit ramifications of having these student loans on our credit report and having a lender take a look at us, in our full capacity and going, why would I give you a mortgage if you owe $200,000 to somebody else? So mitigating that $200,000 or, at least coming up with a payment plan where you are paying as agreed as to that creditor. That's going to be helpful for when you want to buy a house for your family or want to do something with your credit that you need to do or would like to do. Having financial goals, planning these things. And then just with respect to student loans in general, parents, start saving money now. If you have a child who is a day old, put money in an account for college because these costs continue to rise.
Right.
And the biggest concern and problem that we have as a society is the metering of the educational costs of graduate and undergraduate, education in general, and also saving. We can't save. The West Side Story, I want to be in America, everything on credit in America. That's true. We have a credit problem as an American society. And so just by sort of financial planning, making small, good decisions about, if you have a child under the age of 5, yes, I know you got to find schools for them and clothes. You got to make sure they're happy and you get the right car seat. But you need to start planning for college because college is expensive. And until this country decides to do something about it, which could take time, we're talking about it and the dialogue is great, action would be better. And until that action sort of comes to fruition, having money to pay for it, to alleviate the problem in the first place where you're not getting student loans, where you're not saddling, your children with the debt, that's the easiest way to resolve this issue. And obviously, I myself am someone that had to incur loans in order to go to law school. And, paying as agreed is going to be the most helpful thing you can do. And not staring at it, not opening that mail, not being proactive, not being on the offense, being on the defense is the worst thing you can do for that financial future. So be proactive. Look up your credit report. Get that information. Have it on hand. Know your creditors so that you can work with them and be an individual that they want to work with because you have been so good about contacting them, because you have been so proactive with them.
Well, Joy, thank you. I think that's great information for all of our viewers at home, and tune in next month for a new episode of Insider's Guide to the Law.